So, what can you tell me about this new edition of Pathfinder? So, Pathfinder 2e went through an extensive playtest before publication, and thanks to all of the feedback from the community, this is arguably one of the most comprehensive and well-designed RPGs ever to hit the market. For example, do you remember the Alchemist class from 1st edition? Yeah, I remember that class. I really enjoyed playing it. Well, we've taken the Alchemist and we've brought it in as one of the core classes in the base game for Pathfinder 2e, and we've gone out of our way to make this class amazing. That sounds cool. By the way, really nice, completely non-anachronistic shirt that you're wearing. Thanks, glad you noticed. First, let me say, we've knocked the flavor of the Alchemist class completely out of the park. Alchemy is no longer a cheap knockoff of arcane magic, but it's its own separate and unique mechanical element inside of the game. That's interesting. And in honor of Pathfinder 2e being such a flexible game, allowing you to play such a wide variety of characters, we have made the Alchemist one of the most flexible classes in this incredibly flexible system. You could say that this class combines some of the best elements of the wizard, the sorcerer, the rogue into its own unique, flavorful, and interesting option. Ooh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Wait a minute, what's the catch? Oh, so we did write this class. Oh, I see what you're saying. Extreme editing issues? Yeah, lots of editing issues. Today, we're going to talk about the Alchemist class in Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller here to argue that the Alchemist is not underpowered, because how could a class be underpowered if it has regular access to sovereign glue? Think about it. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today, we're going to return to the Classic Introduction series, where we take a look at different classes inside of Pathfinder to see what they have to offer new players at the gaming table. And today, we're going to be taking a look at the Alchemist class from the Core Rulebook for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, to be completely transparent for this video, originally I had scheduled for this to be the Classic Introduction Familiars video, and I ended up deciding to hold off on doing the Familiars video because as of the recording of this video, Book of the Dead has not been released yet, but from what I understand of the spoilers that have been coming out for Book of the Dead, there should be some more familiar options in that book, and so I decided to push the Classic Introductions Familiars back a month so I could hopefully get a hold of that book and check out those new options and include those when I do my video for Familiars. So for those of you who are waiting for the Familiars video, don't worry, that is still coming. I just decided to pause for a bit so that my video would be the most up-to-date. In the interim, I asked you all on my YouTube page which class I should go ahead and cover for this series, and you all voted that you wanted to see the Alchemist. So today, we're going to go back to the Core Rulebook and take a look at the very first class listed for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In 1st Edition, the Alchemist was an advanced class that was added to the game later in the game's life cycle, but in 2nd Edition, Paizo went the distance and actually made Alchemist one of the core classes for the game, and it was included in the Core Rulebook. It was playable at launch. So today we're going to take a look at the Alchemist, what it does, how it plays, and what you can expect if you're interested in playing an Alchemist. Before we dive into all of that though, I just want to encourage you to do all of the YouTube stuff. If you enjoy the video, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, leave your thoughts and observations in the comments section down below. I love to hear from you all. It's the best part of this job. And if you're interested in becoming part of the Disaster Tour Guide community, you can check out my free Discord, linked in the video description. And if you're interested in supporting the channel financially, my Patreon is down there as well. Also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this video. Okay, so today I would like to give a huge shout out to the sponsor for this episode, ArcKnight. ArcKnight is a company based out of Texas that makes accessories for tabletop RPGs like D&D and Pathfinder. They use a durable die-cut plastic to come up with, to be honest, an incredible array of different products, such as flat plastic minis, maps, object sheets, and the item that we're going to be advertising in this particular video, spell templates. Now, this is a relatively new item from ArcKnight. These are Pathfinder 2nd Edition specific spell templates, and as you can see, I haven't even opened the package yet, but I can already tell you that I love these spell templates because, well, to be honest, I sort of already have them. A couple of years ago, I purchased ArcKnight's D&D 5e spell templates for use in my Pathfinder games, and I am excited that they now have Pathfinder-specific templates I get to use. So I'm going to open these up, and we're going to take a look at how you use them. As you can see here, our adventuring party is facing off against an evil sorceress. And there's a number of different spells that might get employed during such a fight. For example, the evil sorceress might summon a creature to aid her in battle. Or she might summon something a little bit bigger. The evil sorceress could also try to hinder the party by throwing down a spell like Grease to interrupt the movement of the party's warrior. It's very easy to slide them underneath of a figure or a pawn to help record the location of hindering effects on the battlefield. The text of the various spells are written on one side of the spell effects, meaning that you have quick access to the rules associated with the particular spell. Now, the sorceress is not the only one who's got some tricks up her sleeve. Ampara, the party druid, has access to the Dragon Breath spell, which he can easily lay down to show the area of effect and blast the evil sorceress in question. It seems that the evil sorceress in this instance was not prepared for the party, so she's going to drop an obscuring mist spell to cover her retreat. As you can see, these spell effects are colorful, easy to use, visible to the entire table, and a fantastic addition to your collection. So that's a quick overview of how you can use spell templates at your gaming table. And I just want to say there's a ton of stuff that I love about these templates. I love how colorful they are, I love how easy they are to use, and one of the things I love about all ArcKnight products is how incredibly easy to store they are. One of the challenges of tabletop RPGs as a hobby is finding space to put all of your stuff. But one of the great things about these simple plastic accessories that ArcKnight offers is they are very easy to store and to put away, and they don't take up a ton of room. My wife and I are super excited to be working with ArcKnight. We have been a customer of them for years. We've done several of their Kickstarters. I've actually talked to them at Gen Con a couple of times, and they are a fantastic company, and they have fantastic customer service. I've placed many orders over the years, and on the single occasion that I had an order go wrong, their customer service team was extremely quick to respond and fix the problem. So ArcKnight produces incredible accessories, you get a ton of stuff at a fantastic price, and their team is professional, courteous, and ready to help you upgrade your game. So I'll throw a link to them in the video description. You can go over and check them out and let them know that the Disaster Tour Guide sent you. Alright, so when we talk about the classes in Pathfinder 2e, we discuss them under 5 major questions. Those are, what is the Alchemist? What are the strengths of the Alchemist? What are the weaknesses of the Alchemist? What options does the Alchemist offer? And finally, how can I get the most out of the Alchemist in play? So, with those questions in mind, let's get started. Alright, so our first question is, what is the Alchemist? And this question we actually break into some subcategories to help new players really grasp what the Alchemist is and what they can expect when they play it. To help define what the Alchemist is, we take a look at what is the class role, how complex is the class, and finally, what are the key terms or ideas that you need to know in order to play the class. So, let's tackle these real quick. First up, what is the Alchemist class role? Well, technically, the Alchemist is what's known as an intelligence-based martial class. By the way, I know some of you all are probably already putting replies in the comment section about the word martial class. Don't worry, we'll talk about it. Now that phrase, intelligence-based martial class, is a little bit vague, so let's dive a little bit deeper. The Alchemist is a class that specializes in brewing and mixing unique compounds that they can turn into dangerous bombs to use against their opponents, or helpful elixirs to use to benefit their allies. They gain access to a variety of alchemical tools, possibly some unique double-edged mutagens that have both benefits and drawbacks. It is a class that definitely comes with a bit of a mad scientist feel, where your ability to improvise and create unique concoctions to help you in battle is the core of what the class hopes to accomplish. And to be clear, the Alchemist does have a lot of the hallmarks of a martial class in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. They have 2 strong saving throws, Fortitude and Reflex, and they get an initial class feat at first level like any other martial class in the game. But when you think about martial class, usually you think about dealing damage, and that's where you begin to ask, what kind of damage can an Alchemist deal? And that's going to largely depend on the types of items that they know how to create. We'll dive into that a little more in depth when we get to the class options section, but there's going to be some variety here. So you could have an Alchemist that range from throwing powerful bombs at the enemy to maybe an Alchemist who drinks potent mutagens and mixes it up in melee with the monsters that they encounter. You can also end up with an Alchemist that specializes in terrible poisons, or an Alchemist who specializes in healing their team and keeping the party alive. There is a lot of variety here under this label of martial class. Just understand that the Alchemist specializes in mixing unique items up, and whether they are a bomber or a healer or whatever they may be, that they fall under what the game would term a martial class. And I just realized that that first subpoint was really complicated, so let's go ahead and talk about the complexity of the Alchemist, because the Alchemist is the only class in Pathfinder 2e, at least so far, that I give a complexity rating of 10 out of 10. Listen, I'm just going to be honest with you, Alchemist is easily the hardest class in this game to understand. Now, allow me to offer my quick caveat that I do anytime I talk about complexity. If you are interested in a class, don't let the complexity of the class dissuade you. I have personally seen brand new players pick up the Alchemist in a Pathfinder 2e game and do perfectly well with the class. Even a new player can use the Alchemist successfully. I do feel like the Alchemist is easily the hardest class to learn, and you've definitely got a steep climb ahead of you if you want to try to tackle this class. But over the years, I have seen that player interest far outweighs complexity in determining whether or not a person is going to be successful playing a particular class. If Alchemist sounds interesting to you, give it a shot. I think you'll have a great time. Just be aware that it may take a little bit of extra effort to really get the most out of this class. Okay, so let's move on to key terms. One of the things that I really like about Pathfinder 2e is that in every single class section in their books, they have a convenient sidebar that highlights the key terms and concepts that you need to be aware of in order to play that class, and they do the same for the Alchemist, and the Alchemist comes in with only 2 key terms that you need to know: additive and infused. Infused refers to infused reagents, and as an alchemist, every day you're going to get a certain number of infused reagents that you can use to develop the different bombs, elixirs, mutagens, tools that you use in the course of your adventures. You'll get a number of infused reagents equal to your level plus your intelligence modifier, so probably 4 or 5 at level 1. And these infused reagents are going to interact with different class abilities in different ways, but basically when you hear that term infused, I want you to think expiration date. Infused alchemical items don't last long. Depending on the specific class ability that you use, an infused item might lose its potency after 24 hours, or in some cases, after a single round. So, when you make infused items, they definitely have a shelf life. The other key term that you need to know is additive, and an additive is when you intend to enhance one of the alchemical items that you're creating. Maybe you add something to one of your bombs, such as leaving behind a cloud of smoke after it explodes, or maybe you enhance an elixir in some fashion. An additive is simply something that you do to make one of your infused alchemical items a bit stronger. There's some complexity here too. Normally, as an alchemist, you can only make items up to your character level. So, if you're level 5, you could only make level 5 alchemical items or below. Additives will always have a number beside them, so you might see something like additive 1 or additive 2, and what that does is it modifies the item level of whatever you're creating. So, for example, an additive for one of your bombs might be additive 2, and if you use that with a first level bomb, it would functionally become a 3rd level item. Meaning that in order to use that additive with that bomb, you'd have to be at least a 3rd level character, or else you wouldn't be able to make it. So those are the 2 key terms that Paizo gives us for the Alchemist class. The first is additive, the second is infused, and while there's definitely some complexity to those 2 key terms, I mean, it's only 2 key terms, surely that's all we've got to deal with. No. Okay, so really quick, I want to throw some page references at you before we continue with this discussion of key terms. If you really want to understand the Alchemist, you definitely want to spend some time reading up a few different places. The Alchemist is described from pages 71 to 81 of the Core Rulebook, and there's some additional features on pages 106 to 107 of the Advanced Player's Guide. But you also want to check out pages 543 to 554 in the Core Rulebook, and there are also some additional alchemical items that you want to check out in the APG, which can be found starting on page 252. In addition, Alchemist is a class where I thoroughly encourage you to make sure that you either have a very up-to-date Core Rulebook or that you have access to Paizo's errata document of the Core Rulebook, because the Alchemist has the most errata of any class in this game, and especially for options like the Mutagenist, you are going to need that errata or you're not going to have an accurate description of the class. Also, I guess I'll throw this in here, because the Alchemist works so much with alchemical items, this is one of those classes where you kind of have to dig around the Lost Omens series a lot to find the 1 or 2 alchemical items that they sprinkle here, there, and everywhere. Seriously, the support for this class is scattered. Okay, so now that you know where you can read up on the Alchemist, let's go back to the key terms, and let's expand upon additives and infused, and talk about advanced alchemy and quick alchemy, because these are 2 of the key class abilities that you'll pick up at first level, and you need to understand these abilities if you want to play an alchemist well. Advanced alchemy allows you to create batches of particular alchemical items ahead of time. As long as you have the appropriate formula in your formula book, you can create 2 copies of any one item up to your character level using a single infused reagent, and that item will remain potent up to 24 hours. So you could create 2 lesser elixirs of healing, or 2 Juggernaut mutagens, or 2 Alchemist Fire. Basically, because you are preparing the items ahead of time, you get more efficient use of your infused reagents, and each single reagent gives you 2 items that you can use during your adventures. However, as an alchemist, you have another option, and that's the quick alchemy action. This allows you to use alchemy in the field and prepare whatever item you want at the exact moment that you need it. So if you're in the field and you're facing down a troll and you know that troll is weak to fire, you can spend an action and an infused reagent to whip up a batch of alchemist fire to fling at that troll. Now, this is not as efficient as advanced alchemy. You only get 1 item for 1 infused reagent, and there's another downside. The item doesn't maintain its potency nearly as long, meaning that you want to use that item by the end of the round, or the item is lost. But these 2 abilities taken together form kind of the core of your class and one of the core decisions you have to make when playing an alchemist. Advanced alchemy gives you more items, but you have to prepare them ahead of time. Quick alchemy allows you to get the exact item you need when you need it, but it's not as efficient in the creation process. It's kind of a mixture of the prepared spellcasting that we've talked about for classes like the Wizard and the spontaneous spellcasting of classes like the Bard. Alchemists kind of live between both worlds with the ability to both prepare their items ahead of time and also produce whatever item they need in the actual moment. And a lot of the strategy of playing an alchemist is actually balancing these 2 items against one another. What do I know ahead of time that I can go ahead and prepare at a more efficient rate? And how many infused reagents do I need to hold back so that I have some spontaneous options when I'm actually out in the field? Alright, so in the key terms, we've got additive and infused. We've got advanced alchemy and quick alchemy. Is that all that we need to know for the alchemist? Of course not. Since alchemist is a class that relies so heavily on the items that they produce, the traits of items that they produce become very important to understanding the class. In other words, when you are using alchemical items, you're going to need to pay attention to the different traits that the item possesses. Now, a lot of these traits are very straightforward and easy to understand. For example, most of your items are going to have the consumable trait, and that means when you use it, it's gone. That's not too difficult to understand. But there are a lot of traits, and there are definitely a lot of things you want to keep up with. One of the most common traits is the bomb trait. Some of the alchemist's most consistent damage comes from the bombs that they create, so you kind of need to understand what a bomb is, but unfortunately, bombs are not listed in the equipment section. They're actually listed in the treasure section towards the end of the book. Thanks, Paizo. Bombs are a martial thrown weapon with a range increment of 20 feet, and because of the complexity involved with preparing a bomb for use, using a bomb actually gains the manipulate trait, which may become relevant if you're facing foes that have certain abilities like attack of opportunity. And no, they couldn't put any of that in the equipment section. Why? Why is that in the back of the book? Also, a lot of bombs come with the splash trait. And that just references the fact that when a bomb explodes, that it damages a large area beyond just the initial target of the attack. So, if a weapon is a splash weapon, when you attack the enemy, if you roll a critical failure, nothing happens. However, if you roll a normal failure, the enemy will still take whatever splash damage might be associated with that particular weapon. So, a lesser acid flask has 1 splash acid damage. Even on a failure, that acid flask would deal 1 acid damage to your target. On a success, the target takes the main damage of the weapon and the splash damage of the weapon. That's not clear-cut if you haven't read the rules closely. So remember, on a success, main damage and splash damage. And then you also deal that splash damage to all other targets within 5 feet of your main target. So a splash weapon has an effect not just on a success and critical success, but also on a failure, kind of making bombs and other splash weapons similar to spells in that effect. Another common trait that you'll see for alchemical items is elixir, which represents an item that a character might drink in order to gain a benefit. One example of an elixir is a mutagen. Now here's an important point. All mutagens are elixirs, not all elixirs are mutagens. I've messed this up in previous videos. It's a technicality of the rules that you can overlook if you're not paying attention. All elixirs give some benefit to the person who drinks it. Mutagens often have a more powerful and direct benefit. However, mutagens also come with a drawback of some kind. So a mutagen might give you claw attacks and a bite attack, but then come with other penalties that remain active as long as that mutagen is in your system. If you're dealing with a mutagen, mutagens have the polymorph trait, which has its own set of rules that you can go read up on. But basically what you need to know here is characters typically cannot benefit from more than one polymorph effect at any given time, so if more than one would be active, one of those effects is going to get cancelled. Therefore, if you're using mutagens, you can only have one of them going at once, at least until other class features come in, but that's getting ahead of the curve. And then we get to talk about poisons. And I'm not going to go into all of the rules for poisons here, but again, there's going to be a lot more traits you need to know, such as inhaled poisons, ingested poisons, injury poisons, and contact poisons. As you can see, the Alchemist is so dependent upon items that being familiar with the technical nuances of the traits of those items is going to go a long way in determining how much use you get out of the class. Splash damage can be very, very effective, but if you don't know all of the technicalities of splash damage, you could miss out on some of what the Alchemist has to offer. So, when we talk key terms and definitions, be aware there's more than just the two listed with the class. You're going to spend some time getting to know exactly what items do and exactly how items interact with the rules, but once you get a hang of that, Alchemist has got a lot that they can offer. So now that we have an idea of kind of all the crazy stuff you have to understand to play an Alchemist well, let's set that aside and let's step back, take a big picture look at the class, and ask the question, what are the strengths of the Alchemist? And I want to start here with the core skill of the Alchemist, which is the crafting skill. Now, I know that a lot of people like to complain about crafting, and I may do a separate video on the subject of crafting in Pathfinder 2e, but just for a moment, I want to pause and point out the Alchemist is the class best positioned to take advantage of the crafting skill in all of its glory. Alchemists will begin the game trained in the crafting skill, and depending on the type of alchemist that you get, you might even be able to unlock special uses of the crafting skill, such as the Chirurgeon, who can use crafting in place of the medicine skill, allowing them to take that focus on crafting and put it to even more uses. Their strength with the crafting skill is sort of an understandable and easy to appreciate benefit of playing the class. But I want to point something out here. Alchemists are obviously good at crafting alchemical items. That's kind of the main thing the class does. But there are a lot of other niches inside of the Pathfinder 2e rules that are also covered with crafting. For example, you have the skill feats, snare crafting and magical crafting, which are both skill feats that an alchemist can easily take advantage of. If you enjoy playing the kind of character who can make whatever the team needs, Alchemist is the perfect fit for you, because even beyond just alchemy, you can very easily branch into the other niches of the crafting skill and become sort of a one-stop shop for anything that your party might need. An alchemist with a little bit of time and a little bit of forethought can go a long way to setting a party up for success before the adventure ever begins. And this focus on crafting kind of bleeds into the next strength that I want to talk about for the alchemist, which is alchemists are skill monkeys. Sure, they don't push skills quite as hard as the rogue does, but an alchemist is going to begin trained with the crafting skill, and then 3 more skills plus their intelligence modifier, plus whatever they get from their background. Assuming that you have at least a 16 in starting intelligence, that means you're going to begin the game with crafting and 8 other skills, which means over half of the skills inside of Pathfinder 2e, And if you're pushing intelligence throughout the game, that's only going to go higher. And since alchemists don't have skills that they desperately need for the core of what their class does, that leaves you a lot of opportunity to really customize your skill set to whatever is the best fit for the alchemist that you're playing. If you want to be a brawling mutagenist, you could pick up athletics and acrobatics to make you more effective when you get in close with your enemies. If you style yourself more like an assassin and take the Toxicologist for your subclass, picking up skills like thievery and stealth are very easy for you to do. The point is this: you've got the skills to invest anywhere and everywhere very easily. And all of this serves to highlight what is ultimately the greatest strength of the alchemist, which is flexibility. Pathfinder 2e is a very flexible system, and alchemist is kind of the class that embodies that flexibility the best. They have some of the earliest and easiest access to a wide variety of damage types and the ability to modify their weapons to match whatever is the most appropriate for the enemy that they're fighting. They can produce healing potions and antidotes at the drop of a hat, and in many cases, they can whip up the exact tool for the job in front of them, just like that. Alchemist is an incredibly flexible class, and if you've got the ability to take advantage of that flexibility, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of this class. Also, I want to throw this in here. I mentioned splash earlier, but the frequency of splash damage for a lot of their weapons means that while alchemists may not have the highest average damage, they are very consistent in the damage that they deal, and if you can make flexible use of your enemy's weaknesses, that consistent damage can be a pretty nice bonus to your team. Okay, but now let's talk about the other side of the coin. Let's talk about the weaknesses of the Alchemist class. And the first one should be pretty obvious because I've kind of been complaining about it this entire video. That is bad editing, confusing layout. The Alchemist is, let's be honest, a mess. Paizo has something of a reputation for rough editing from time to time, and I definitely think the Alchemist class is the prime example of how Paizo gets that reputation. This is a class that is just really confusing. On a casual read, you're probably going to walk away from the Alchemist with misunderstandings about several different parts of how the class functions, and you can miss a lot of nuance in the Alchemist very easily. To say nothing of the fact that the Alchemist is a class where you're going to need the errata for the Core Rulebook if you don't have a very recent print edition. I would strongly encourage anyone who is considering an Alchemist, especially a Mutagenist, to make sure that you either have the errata or that you are checking out Archives of Nethys, because my Core Rulebook versions of the Alchemist is a little rough. Alchemist is a confusing class, and that confusion can very easily lend itself to a bad play experience if you're not careful. A lot of people who take shots at Pathfinder 2e like to complain about how the game is too complex and too fiddly and too many rules, and I usually find that complaint to be a little overblown, but with the Alchemist I would say there is some validity. This is definitely a crunchy class with a lot of tiny little bits, and being able to distinguish between regular damage, persistent damage, splash damage, items with 7 different traits that you gotta know what those traits mean. There's a lot here, and it's not always laid out in a way that's going to be easy to understand. And I would recommend checking out forums and message boards and making sure you have a good grasp of what the Alchemist can do before trying to play one, because otherwise you're probably going to miss stuff. I know I have, and I've been playing this game very heavily since the playtest. And speaking of confusion, it's time for me to finally respond to all of the keyboard warriors who heard me say that the Alchemist is a martial class in Pathfinder 2e. The Alchemist is technically a martial class that kind of feels more like a caster. Okay, so when we think about martial classes, we usually think about maybe damage dealing classes, maybe tanking style classes. We tend to think of characters who have really strong weapon skills and armor skills, and the Alchemist doesn't fit that very well. The Alchemist actually caps out at expert weapon proficiency, and while their armor proficiency does eventually get to master, they get to master proficiency pretty late in the game, meaning that the Alchemist is a pretty squishy martial character. Even versions of the Alchemist like the Mutagenist that can take elixirs like the Juggernaut Mutagen or the Bestial Mutagen, while those mutagens are intended for melee combat, you want to get up close and personal with the monsters involved, you don't want to overestimate how tough your Alchemist is compared to other martial characters, because it's really easy for an Alchemist to get in over their head because ultimately their weapon and armor progressions just don't line up with some of the more martially oriented classes that technically use the same design approach the Alchemist does. When you examine the Alchemist, you want to think of it almost like a spellcaster using a martial class framework. And I think if you have that mindset, you will have a better experience with the class. But definitely, at the end of the day, be aware that for a martial class, your weapon proficiencies, your armor proficiencies, they're not going to be as high as you want them to be, and that is going to impact your play. The final thing I'd like to say on weaknesses, and this is just kind of a general design philosophy point, but I think you'll see how it wraps in with everything else I've said. The Alchemist is an extremely flexible class, but because it is such a flexible class, it sacrifices a lot of focus. Ultimately meaning you can do a lot of things pretty good, but nothing extremely well. And while we've seen classes with that design in other TTRPGs, it does feel a little bit like a shock with the Alchemist, just because, like I said, the editing and confusion around the Alchemist means it's not clear at first glance that you are playing more of a generalist, flexible character compared to some of the more specialized classes inside of the game. Alright, so for the fourth question in this video, let's talk about the major options that the Alchemist offers you, or as most people would say, let's talk about the subclasses. The Alchemist comes with 4 subclasses, 3 in the Core Rulebook and 1 in the Advanced Player's Guide. The 3 in the Core Rulebook are the Bomber, the Chirurgeon, and the Mutagenist. And then, in the Advanced Player's Guide, we actually got one of the subclasses back from the playtest, which is the Toxicologist. Now, all of these subclasses are going to follow a very similar progression to one another. Every subclass is going to give you 2 free formulas to add to your formula book at level 1, and the 2 free formulas are going to be, well, pretty obvious based on whatever subclass you pick. So the Bomber gives you 2 free bomb formulas. The Chirurgeon is going to give you 2 formulas associated with healing and caring for your team. The Mutagenist is going to give you 2 free mutagens. And then the Toxicologist is going to give you 2 free poisons. However, from there, each subclass is also going to give you a special ability that is going to modify either the items that you use or some aspect of your class. First up, we have the Bomber. The Bomber is going to gain more control over the splash weapons that they wield. When a Bomber uses a splash weapon, they can decide to only deal the splash damage to the primary target of their attack, meaning that none of the other creatures around that target would be hit by any splash damage. In other words, Bombers don't have to worry about friendly fire. If you've got a group of enemies, throw the bomb normally, but if your allies are engaged in combat with the enemies, you can target just that specific enemy, and your allies don't take any risk from the splash damage. The Chirurgeon is going to gain a modification to their skills in that, as long as the Chirurgeon is trained in medicine, they can use crafting for any medicine skill check that is untrained or trained. Now, I will say that rules as written, it appears that you would still need any medicine skill feats that unlock new options for using medicine. So you may still need to invest some skill feats if you want to expand what you can do with crafting for medicine, but you can keep a very heavy focus on the crafting skill and push that numerically as hard as you want to, and then you don't have to invest in trying to raise your medicine skill as well because you have that better modifier with crafting. The Mutagenist is one of the big reasons that there is so much errata for the Alchemist, but the Mutagenist is going to gain a special ability called Mutagenic Flashback, usable once per day as a free action. Basically what this does is you can benefit from a mutagen that you've already used earlier in the day. So imagine that you use a bestial mutagen or a juggernaut mutagen in a fight, and then later that same day you get attacked again. Well, you can, as a free action, immediately benefit from that mutagen once more. And this can apply to any mutagen that you might have used. So if you were using a serene mutagen earlier in the day and you find yourself in need of that benefit again, it's there and immediately available. Mutagenists have this ability to kind of just spontaneously recall a previously used item, and that is a pretty powerful benefit to be able to use as a free action. I don't want to understress that point. Next up is the Toxicologist, and the Toxicologist gains a couple of abilities. First, they get the ability to apply injury poisons to a weapon as a single action rather than as a two-action activity. Additionally, any poison that a Toxicologist uses can use either the poison's DC or their class DC, whichever is higher. This means that your low-level poisons remain a threat through the course of the entire game, and you aren't hampering your offense if you choose to use that lower-level poison. Now, that's what happens at level 1, but I do want to take a little bit of a further look at these subclasses because there is a very important ability that alchemists get called Perpetual Infusions. And the idea here is that at a certain point, alchemists can just kind of rapidly create with quick alchemy certain items that are just kind of second nature to them. Now, this again is going to be very contingent upon which subclass you're playing. So, if you're a bomber, you're going to get to pick 2 different bombs that are lower level than your max level, and you get the ability to just create those over and over and over again with quick alchemy without spending any infused reagents. Functionally, you turn those lower level alchemical items into reusable cantrips that you can drop anytime you want. The Mutagenist is going to get the ability to create a couple of lower level mutagens. The Toxicologist is going to have access to a couple of lower level poisons. And then the Chirurgeon is one that I've seen attacked a little bit online because they only get 2 options: Antidote and Antiplague. They don't get the ability to create infinite healing. That would obviously be broken, but functionally what they get is the ability to permanently give their entire team a bonus on saves against poison and disease. And if you ask me, that's not a bad class feature. I buff my entire team against 2 very debilitating effects. Sure, it's limited, its scope is a little narrow, but I'm not gonna lie, I still like this ability. But now that we have a good understanding of the different subclasses available to the Alchemist, let's move on to our last question for the video, which is, how can I get the most out of the Alchemist? And to make my editing life easier, I'm just going to cut in all of the how to get the most out of the wizard video. Hold on, let me go do that real quick. Okay, fine. Alright, so let's take a look at the big picture. One of the strengths of the Alchemist is flexibility. They are a class that is truly adept at modifying their tools, their elixirs, their mutagens, their bombs, whatever. They are adept at adapting to whatever situation they're in. Are they a specialist in any one thing? No, but their flexibility is their strength. And that means that if you want to play an Alchemist well and truly feel like you are getting the most out of the Alchemist, you really need to embrace this flexible mindset. You probably will not have a good experience with this class if you lock yourself into one particular rotation or one particular set of actions. You will probably find that whatever you lock yourself into, you're just not optimized for, and you're just not as effective as the other people inside of the game. Options are the key to your success, and if you think back to that balance between advanced alchemy and quick alchemy, you can kind of see why flexibility is so important. If you know a certain challenge is coming, advanced alchemy allows you to prepare for that particular challenge, but keeping some of your reagents back for quick alchemy allows you to respond in the moment with whatever the perfect item for that situation is going to be. If you use all of your infused reagents at the start of the day, because that's just the most efficient use, you will probably find yourself in a situation where several of those things you create aren't really applicable to whatever challenge has been thrown at you. So rule number 1, be flexible. And rule number 2, look for things that help you be flexible. One of the most powerful things that a wizard can do in Pathfinder 2e is hunt for more spells to add to their spellbook. Why? It makes them more flexible. This is doubly true for you as an alchemist, because if it's in your formula book, you have quick alchemy so you can get it whenever you need it. Hunting for more alchemical formulas, looking for more options of things that you can do, ultimately makes you stronger and better able to adapt to whatever circumstances you find yourself in. And though I've mentioned it in passing, we'll go ahead and say it again here. As an alchemist, if you want to be successful, you need to be targeting the weaknesses of your enemies. Now, this is a point that is very true of Pathfinder 2e overall. If you've seen my other videos, you know that I say this a lot. But as an alchemist, you are on the flimsier side of what qualifies as a martial character, and you're probably not going to win a fist fight with a brick wall, is what I'm saying. If you want to win, you got to fight smart, but you have a very adaptable, flexible playbook. Figure out what your enemy is weak to. Figure out what options you have, and make it a point to target whatever is ideal for taking down your opponent. Remember earlier I said that as an alchemist, you deal damage against the target of your attack when you fail with a splash weapon? If you hit an enemy with a splash weapon that targets one of their weaknesses, that's still going to be pretty decent damage, especially for a failure. Of course, that naturally means that you probably want to check out some recall knowledge actions so that you are better able to identify the best way to target your opponents. And the last thing I'm going to say on getting the most out of an alchemist is this: you are a very intelligent person. Intelligence is core to the Alchemist class. And one of the things that intelligent characters do, and do well, is plan. They research the battle ahead, they know where they're going, they know what they're doing, and they make it a point to prepare themselves for whatever might be in their way. You don't want to lock yourself into a plan, but you do want to make sure that you've got a plan so that you are prepared for whatever the Game Master might throw at you. And if you plan well, I guarantee you, you'll see a lot of mileage from Pathfinder 2e's most flexible class. But this has already been a really long video, so the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What do you think of my analysis of the Alchemist class? Do you agree with my opinion that this is simultaneously Paizo's most complex and confusing class, and also its most flexible and one of its most engaging classes? Let me know in the comments down below. Are there any strengths or weaknesses of the Alchemist that I have overlooked? And what are some of your favorite examples of the different items that Alchemists can create? Like I mentioned before, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and share it, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out my free Discord and my Patreon, both of which are linked in the video description below. And one last time, let me give a shout out to ArcKnight. Thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. And to the entire Disaster Tour Guide community, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.